I used to think courtrooms were where truth prevailed. That if you told your side of the story clearly and calmly, justice would follow. But that belief shattered the moment I stepped into court and heard my neighbors flat out lie under oath. And the worst part? Everyone believed them. Everyone, except the hidden camera I had installed 6 weeks earlier. But let me take you back to where it all began, before courtrooms, cameras, and chaos. I live in a suburban neighborhood called Willow Creek Ridge. The kind of place where lawns are trimmed with military precision, recycling bins have rules, and everyone smiles just enough to seem friendly, but not too much to actually mean it. I moved in 3 years ago, single, in my 30s, and fully convinced I was buying peace and privacy. Enter my next-door neighbors, Dean and Carla Hoffman. From day one, they seemed intense. Overly friendly, but something always felt performative. Dean was the president of the Neighborhood Watch and Carla ran the HOA's Aesthetic Compliance Committee. They both had a reputation for being helpful, but controlling. And within weeks, I started noticing little things. Like how Carla would walk along the edge of my lawn with a ruler. Or how Dean would happen to stop by whenever I had guests over, just to remind me of noise ordinances. Still, I smiled, nodded, and tried to keep things civil. That was my first mistake. The second? Thinking ignoring them would make them go away. It all escalated one summer when I hired a local contractor to install a backyard deck. I had the permits, approvals, everything in order. But on the second day of construction, Carla marched over holding a clipboard like it was a weapon. "There's been a mistake," she announced, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "That structure violates Article 14B of the HOA guidelines." I pulled out my permits and even showed her a printed copy of the HOA's own rules. She squinted at the paper like it personally offended her. "This is outdated," she said, tapping her pen. "We updated the rules last month." Without a vote. Without a notice. And without telling anyone else in the neighborhood. She told me I'd need to stop construction or face a formal complaint. Now I'm not one to pick fights, but something about the way she smirked made me say, "Go ahead. File the complaint." That was the spark. What followed was a slow, calculated campaign of intimidation. Within a week, I got my first fine, $100 for overgrown shrubs. The next day, another, $200 for unregistered lawn furniture. Then came the letters, official-looking, threatening legal action for violating HOA policy. When I tried asking other neighbors, most shrugged and said, "Yeah, that's just Carla. Better to just comply." But something felt off. Why was I suddenly being targeted? Why did Dean keep walking past my property, taking pictures with his phone? Why were my motion lights mysteriously turned off every other night? I started documenting everything. Dates, times, photos. I even bought a small notebook I kept by the front door just to jot down incidents. It was exhausting. And the stress started creeping into every part of my life. I dreaded going outside. I even started parking 2 blocks away just to avoid interacting with them. Then one night, everything changed. It was 2 a.m. I couldn't sleep. I was on the couch, scrolling through my phone when I heard a faint noise. Like something metallic scraping. I turned off the TV and listened again. There it was. Coming from the side of the house, right near the deck. I quietly got up, grabbed a flashlight, and peeked through the blinds. At first, I didn't see anything. But then, a shadow moved. Someone was out there. Near the construction tarp. My heart pounded. I didn't go outside. I didn't shout. Instead, I did what I should have done weeks ago. I installed hidden cameras the next morning. One by the deck. One near the garage. One inside the mailbox. All discreet. All legal. Over the next few weeks, I caught everything. Carla sneaking onto my property and measuring things. Dean loosening the screws on my construction signs. Even footage of the two of them laughing while planting what looked like weeds in my front garden, likely to justify a future complaint. I was stunned. But I didn't react. I just documented. Quietly. Methodically. Until the day their letter arrived. They were taking me to small claims court. Claiming I had caused property devaluation to their home and emotional distress. They had pictures. Fake testimonies. Even claimed I had threatened them with physical harm. And the scariest part? They were good at it. The photos were doctored just enough to seem real. The statements were detailed and delivered with total confidence. Dean even got another neighbor, a friend of his from the HOA, to support his claims. It looked bad. Really bad. But I had something better than a story. I had the truth. On camera. As I sat in that courtroom, watching them lie with ease, I felt a mix of anger and awe. They had done this before. They were used to getting away with it. Manipulating systems. Twisting words. But they didn't know what I had. Not yet. Courtrooms have a strange energy, a mix of cold formality and intense pressure. As I sat at the defendant's table, I watched Dean and Carla transform from smug manipulators into picture-perfect victims. Dean wore a conservative suit, hair slicked back, his expression stoic and wounded. Carla dabbed fake tears with a monogrammed handkerchief. Their lawyer, yes, they'd hired one, painted me as the neighborhood menace. A volatile loner, who refused to follow community guidelines and was now lashing out because I'd been held accountable. The judge looked skeptical, but not unsympathetic. My stomach twisted. I knew the facts, but I also knew perception had power. Then Carla took the stand. She recited her story like she'd rehearsed it for weeks, probably because she had. He stared at me from his driveway for 10 full minutes. Just standing there, clenching his fists. I felt unsafe in my own home, she said, voice trembling. Dean followed. Your Honor, we never wanted this to escalate. We tried to reason with him. But when he threatened to burn down our garden and screamed that the HOA was a scam, we knew we had no choice but to seek protection. The courtroom was silent. All eyes turned to me. I could see the story landing, even with the judge. Their fake kindness, their staged fear. It was convincing. I needed to flip the narrative, and fast. When it was my turn to speak, I stood slowly, trying not to show how angry I really was. I cleared my throat, then said one simple sentence. I have video evidence that contradicts every single thing they just said. The courtroom shifted. Dean's eyes narrowed. Carla stopped dabbing and looked up sharply. I handed the flash drive to the court clerk. I'd taken the time to organize the clips chronologically, each one labeled by date and time. It started with the footage from my back deck, Carla trespassing at 2:13 a.m., holding a flashlight and measuring tape. Then came Dean loosening the support beam signs. Footage of the two of them crouching near my flower beds with handfuls of weeds. And then the piece de resistance, a video with audio, clear as day, of Carla whispering. This'll make him snap. One more fine and he'll either leave or lose it. The courtroom was silent. Then came a low gasp. From the judge. I'm sorry, he said, leaning forward. Can you replay that last one? The clerk hit play again. Carla's voice. Crystal clear. Malicious. Carla turned red. Dean shifted uncomfortably. Their lawyer stammered something about context and privacy. The judge held up his hand. This footage was collected legally, I said. Every camera was on my property, and visible from areas with no expectation of privacy. The judge nodded slowly. It appears the defendants have not only been less than truthful but may be guilty of harassment themselves. Carla's face twisted. This is all being taken out of context. The judge cut her off. Enough. I'm dismissing this case. And I'm recommending that law enforcement review this footage for possible charges. You may have opened the wrong door, Mrs. Hoffman. And just like that, the air in the room changed. I exhaled. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I actually breathed. The lies had fallen apart. The truth had finally spoken. Not because I shouted louder, but because I came prepared. After the hearing, outside the courtroom, Dean and Carla rushed past me without a word. Their lawyer didn't even make eye contact. But I wasn't done. I took the footage and filed a formal complaint with the city. Not only had they fabricated legal claims, but they'd also abused their HOA power to harass a neighbor. That kind of behavior wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. 2 weeks later, an investigator from the city compliance office visited the neighborhood. He asked questions, took statements. And not just from me. Turns out, I wasn't their first target. A single mother down the block had once been fined $500 because her porch light clashed with the HOA's color scheme. Another neighbor had his party broken up by police after Dean falsely reported disturbances. There was a trail, and it was all starting to unravel. But what happened next? That was the moment everything changed. When the city investigator wrapped up his interviews, it didn't take long for the consequences to start rolling in. I received a formal notice from the HOA, not a fine this time, but a statement. They were suspending Carla Hoffman and Dean Mitchell from their positions pending an internal review. The phrase, pending internal review, might sound bureaucratic, but in HOA terms, it was the equivalent of being thrown out of your own palace. Word spread fast. Neighbors who had once ignored me, or looked the other way when Carla and Dean ran their little dictatorship, started stopping by my driveway to chat. One woman, Melissa from across the street, brought me a tray of cookies and quietly admitted, "I'm sorry. I thought they were protecting the neighborhood. I didn't know they were targeting people." I told her, "You weren't the only one. They were good at what they did. Too good." A few days later, a neighborhood meeting was called. Normally, these things were stuffy, half-empty, and chaired by Carla with a fake smile and a gavel she took way too seriously. But this time? Every seat was filled. People stood in the back. The tension was thick, but so was the curiosity. Walter, one of the more neutral, long-time residents, took the lead. He read a summary of the investigation's findings: misuse of authority, targeted harassment, and filing knowingly false complaints. He didn't have to say the names. Everyone already knew. Then he asked the most important question of the night. "Who here thinks it's time for a change?" Every hand in the room went up. Walter called for a special election. For the first time in a decade, leadership of the HOA was up for grabs, and this time, there wouldn't be any sneaky nominations or closed-door votes. This time, the community would actually choose. Dean and Carla didn't show up that night. In fact, they stopped showing up anywhere. Dean's car was gone for long stretches. Carla's once meticulously trimmed front yard started to grow weeds. The power vacuum had not only stripped their authority, it had exposed how little real respect they had in the community. But as much as I wanted to savor the victory, I couldn't help but think about how close they came to winning. If I hadn't installed those cameras, if I hadn't saved those clips, if I hadn't kept my cool in court and let the footage do the talking, I could have lost everything. The truth is, bullies don't always shout. Sometimes they smile, shake hands, and talk about property values. Sometimes they wear badges of authority, whether it's an HOA title, a clipboard, or a fake concern for safety. And that's what made this so dangerous. Carla and Dean didn't just try to take me down, they tried to rewrite the truth itself. They stood in a courtroom, under oath, and fabricated an entirely different version of reality. They made me the villain in their little story, because they thought they could. They underestimated two things: my patience and my preparation. After the meeting, several neighbors approached me. One, a father of two named Reggie, told me something that stuck. "You showed us that we don't have to just take it. We can stand up for ourselves, the right way." That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about clearing my name. This was about showing people that silence is how control spreads. That if one person resists, really resists, it breaks the illusion. Bullies thrive on the idea that they're untouchable. When that illusion cracks, everything else follows. A week later, the new HOA board was voted in. Walter became the president. Melissa, the woman with the cookies, was elected vice president. And guess who they asked to join as the new community liaison? Yep. Me. I didn't want power. I didn't want to sit at the front of meetings or make decisions about lawn decor. But I agreed, not because I wanted the title, but because I wanted to make sure no one else ever had to go through what I did. The first policy I pushed for? Transparency in all HOA dealings. Meeting minutes were now public. Complaints required photographic evidence. No more anonymous revenge reports. And most importantly, a 3-strike rule for any board member caught abusing their position. No one was above accountability anymore. And Carla? Dean? They didn't just lose their influence. They lost the mask they wore for years. When neighbors found out the full truth, their reputation collapsed. I later heard Carla tried to move to a new HOA community. But the moment someone Googled her name and found court documents and that infamous audio clip, the application was quietly denied. Poetic justice. But I wasn't done yet. There was still one more chapter to close. 2 weeks after the neighborhood meeting and the special election, I got a letter in the mail. It wasn't from the HOA this time. It was from Carla's lawyer. At first, I thought it might be some sort of cease and desist, one last desperate swing from someone who couldn't accept defeat. But when I opened it, I was stunned. It was an apology. A full, written statement from Carla Hoffman, dictated through her attorney, acknowledging the personal and legal harm her actions had caused. She admitted to submitting false reports, manipulating HOA procedures, and most importantly, lying under oath. The statement wasn't legally binding, but it was enough to satisfy one important requirement for a civil settlement. Apparently, after the court case and the internal HOA investigation, Carla had been advised to make restitution before I filed a defamation lawsuit, which I had every right to do. In exchange for my silence and further legal action, Carla offered a settlement amount. Let's just say it was enough to pay off my legal fees and install a full set of top-tier security cameras around my house. I took the deal. Not because I needed the money, but because it was a final, undeniable victory. She admitted the truth. On paper. In writing. With her signature. And that was more powerful than anything else. But my story didn't end there. In the weeks that followed, I started getting messages from people in other communities. Word had spread online about what happened, thanks in part to a clip of the courtroom footage going semi-viral on a neighborhood forum. One man wrote, "This is exactly what happened to us. Our HOA tried to evict my mother over a garden gnome. Thank you for showing us it's okay to fight back." Another woman messaged, "We've been afraid to speak up for years. But your story gave us the courage to organize." It was surreal. All I'd done was protect my home. But in doing that, I'd accidentally given others a roadmap. That's when I decided to go all in. I created a simple guide called HOA Survival Kit, a PDF with tips on documenting abuse, understanding bylaws, and installing low-cost security systems. I shared it on community boards and neighborhood watch pages. It wasn't fancy, but it was practical. Within a month, I had over 200 downloads. People weren't just reading it, they were sharing it. Because here's the truth no one talks about: power only exists when people are afraid to challenge it. HOAs aren't evil by nature. They're systems. And like any system, they can be corrupted if no one's watching. But people forget, the power in those systems comes from us. From homeowners. From neighbors. From communities. That's what Carla and Dean never understood. They thought the title, HOA President, made them invincible. But it didn't. It just made them responsible, and once that responsibility was abused, they lost everything. Now, 6 months later, my neighborhood feels different. We still have rules. But they're fair. We still have meetings, but now, they're about community gardens, block parties, and ways to help elderly residents maintain their homes. The fear is gone. People wave to each other again. Kids ride their bikes without being chased down for helmet violations. We've even got a little free library box set up near the park, something Carla had vetoed 3 times before, claiming it was an eyesore. And my camera? Still running. Not out of paranoia, but out of principle. Because I know how easy it is for someone like Carla to rise again. All it takes is one bad election, one apathetic community, and one person hungry for control. But not here. Not anymore. Last week, I hosted a barbecue in my backyard, just a simple get-together for the neighborhood. As I stood by the grill flipping burgers, Walter came over with a drink in hand and said, "You know, you could have moved. You could have walked away. A lot of people would have." I looked around, at the smiling faces, the kids playing tag, the woman from 2 houses down laughing with Melissa over a plate of ribs. And I said, "Yeah. But then Carla would have won." Walter nodded. "Glad you didn't?" "So am I. Because here's the thing I learned from all of this, maybe the biggest lesson of all. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through a hidden camera. And sometimes, the best revenge is rebuilding what someone else tried to tear down. So if you're out there, dealing with a tyrant in a boardroom, a bully with a clipboard, or a so-called leader who's forgotten what leadership means, remember this. Document everything. Know your rights. And never, ever let someone's title make you feel small. Stand tall. Stay smart. And if they lie, hit record.